Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated. All right, ready to dive deep into Wildfire today.
Let's do it.
You've seen the headlines, but we're going beyond that. Like, what's the culture, the science? What's it all mean for the future? We've got some really interesting sources, actually.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, we've got excerpts from a book, Wildfire, The Culture, Science, and Future of Fire, some journal articles, recent news, and even a little mythology.
Mythology. Okay, you got my attention.
Gotta keep things interesting, right?
Politically.
Yeah. So our mission, if you will, is to really understand fire's role, in nature, how we humans have interacted with it, the good and the bad, and what we need to know now with climate change and all.
Yeah. Big stuff. Big, complex stuff.
It is. Yeah. And this book, it starts with this crazy, intense story about the 2018 campfire in Paradise, California. It's terrifying, the speed and power of wildfire,
Oh, absolutely.
There's this quote from a fire official. They said, it was really hard to get your mind around how rapidly it was developing. Like, less than an hour and the whole town gone.
It's a stark reminder of how devastating these fires can be, especially when everything's so dry and the winds pick up. But fire isn't always a bad thing, right? It can actually be pretty key for, renewal. Think of the 1988 fires in Yellowstone.
Oh, yeah, good point. Everyone thought that was it for Yellowstone, that it would never recover. But then just a few years later, it's described as a, wait for it, sea of green.
Sea of green, that's right.
How does that even happen?
Well, it's this thing called ecological succession. After a big disturbance, like a fire, the ecosystem doesn't just go back to how it was before. It goes through these stages. Okay. First, shock, you lose all the vegetation. Then come these pioneer species, grasses and stuff, that grow super fast in disturbed areas. And slowly, those get replaced by shrubs, and then eventually, the big trees come back. So the fires in Yellowstone, yeah, they were awful, but they actually created this chance for the whole cycle to start over. And the result is a much more diverse, vibrant ecosystem.
So fire isn't just about destruction then. It's a vital part of this natural cycle of renewal and growth.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, fire is a process, a chemical reaction, not a substance like, the ancient Greeks thought. We all learned about the fire triangle in school: heat, oxygen, fuel. But get this, for a huge chunk of Earth's history, there were no fires.
Wait, no fires at all? Was it no forests or something?
Oh, there were plants, but the atmosphere was totally different. Not enough oxygen. It took billions of years for photosynthesis to make enough oxygen to actually support combustion. So fire, even though we think of it as this ancient force, is actually relatively new to the planet.
Wow, that's blowing my mind a little. So fire needs a specific environment to exist. Okay, so at some point, humans show up, right? Do they just immediately figure out how to control fire?
Well, the evidence suggests they kind of stumbled on it at first,
Yeah.
Scavenging for food in places that had already burned. But yeah, over time, they learned to control it. And that, my friend, changed everything for our species.
Yeah, can you imagine? The book talks about how cooking with fire made food easier to digest, gave us more energy, even played a role in, get this, brain development.
Totally. And it wasn't just the food. Fire became like the original social network. Imagine early humans around a campfire, telling stories, keeping warm, building community. And because of fire, they could move to colder areas, so their range just expanded across the globe.
So one process, fire, has had a profound effect on human history, culture, even our evolution. Speaking of different cultures, we also look into Indigenous communities and their relationship with fire. It seems like a totally different perspective, right?
Oh, absolutely. It goes way beyond controlled burns. It's a whole worldview. Many cultures see fire as a powerful entity to be respected, even revered, not feared and suppressed like we tend to do.
Yeah, there's that Choctaw story we found about Grandmother Spider bringing fire to humans. It's all about respect and responsibility with fire.
A perfect illustration of a different perspective. And what's even more interesting is these communities have been using fire to manage landscapes for, well, centuries, right? Take the Mayukh tribe in California, or the Noongar people in Australia. They're controlled burns. They've been keeping their ecosystems healthy and vibrant for generations.
And Western science is just catching up to that ancient wisdom. Amazing. What are some of the benefits of those controlled burns? Like, what do they actually do?
Well, the Mayukh tribe's practices, they show that controlled burns can renew life by clearing out all that dead vegetation. They also help shade the rivers, which keeps the water cool for the fish. And by clearing brush, you get more nutrient-dense resources. It's a holistic way of managing the land, recognizing that fire is a crucial part of the balance of nature.
Makes you wonder then, if indigenous cultures have been using fire so well for so long, when did this whole suppress every fire thing start? Was that more recently?
You're right. That shift in thinking really took off in the late 1800s, early 1900s, especially in the U.S.
Was it because of those huge fires, like the ones in Chicago and Peshtigo in 1871? Those were just horrific. Entire towns wiped out. Thousands of people died. I can see why people would just be terrified of fire after that.
Yeah, exactly. Those fires, they really left a mark on people, and it fueled this widespread fear. And around the same time the conservation movement was growing, there was this push to protect forests from being exploited,
And that's when the U.S. Forest Service was born, right? 1905, to protect timber and water resources.
Right. And under Gifford Pinchot, the first chief, fire suppression became the main thing. Pinchot thought all fire was bad, and the Forest Service's job was to just put it out as fast as possible.
So that's where our buddy Smokey Bear comes in, the icon of wildfire prevention.
Exactly. Smokey hit the scene in '44 as part of this big public awareness campaign. Only you can prevent forest fires.
Right. That message, it became part of American culture. And while Smokey definitely got people thinking about fire safety, some experts think that single-minded message, fire is bad, suppress it all, that maybe it actually led to the mega fires we see today.
Oh, interesting. How so? How could preventing fires lead to bigger ones?
Well, by suppressing every single fire, we basically let all that fuel build up in the forests, creating a perfect situation for larger, way more intense fires when something does finally ignite.
It's like we tried to control something natural that's been around forever. Did anyone even question this back then?
Actually, yeah. The 1960s saw the Leopold Report, this huge report, and it challenged this whole fire suppression idea. They argued fire is critical for healthy ecosystems, and they wanted to bring fire back to national parks.
So the science was evolving. Exactly. And it wasn't just the science. People started to realize the importance of indigenous knowledge, those traditional burning practices. People were seeing that decades of suppressing fire had actually made the risk of catastrophic fires even worse.
Wow. Did the Forest Service just jump on that, the Leopold Report?
Not right away. There was pushback. People in the Forest Service were hesitant. It had been their belief for so long, and they were worried about the risks of letting fires burn.
Understandable. After decades of saying fire is bad, changing course can't be easy, was there something that happened, some event that made people change their minds?
Yeah, the big turning point was the summer of '67, the wildfires in Glacier National Park. Those fires burned over 800 acres, and they really put the issue front and center. Public opinion started to shift. And the next year, the National Park Service changed their policy, recognizing that fire is ecologically important and allowing for prescribed burns.
So prescribed burns, a new tool, what are they exactly and how do they work?
Well, a prescribed burn is basically a fire that's set intentionally, but under controlled conditions, obviously. It's mimicking the natural role of fire, producing the fuel, promoting healthy growth, making the landscape more resilient.
There are some really cool examples in the research about Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Prescribed burns are crucial for the giant sequoia trees. They need fire to release their seeds and create the right conditions for new growth.
It's a great example of how fire can actually be a force for life, not just destruction.
But I'm sure there are risks with these prescribed burns. I mean, you're still dealing with fire, right? Which is unpredictable.
You're not wrong. There are definitely risks. Planning and execution are key. A good example is the Lower North Fork fire in Colorado back in 2012.
That one got out of control, right? And there was a lot of damage and, tragically, people died.
Yeah, unfortunately. It shows that even with the best planning, things can happen. But it's important to remember those escapes are pretty rare. Most prescribed burns are done safely and effectively.
It sounds like technology is helping make them safer, more precise. I read about these computer models like fire tech, which are like flight simulators, but for fire behavior.
Oh yeah, those models are super advanced. They look at everything: weather, terrain, fuel loads, even fire history, to try to predict how a fire might behave.
So are these prescribed burns the answer to all our wildfire problems?
They're a really important tool, but no, they're not a magic bullet. We need to go beyond just suppression and think holistically about fire management.
What would that look like? How do we manage fire smarter and create these, what did you call them, fire-adapted communities? I think that's a great place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's really about shifting our mindset, from just fighting fires to actually preparing for them, creating these, what we call fire-adapted communities.
So we're moving away from Smokey Bear's prevent all fires and more towards Ready Squirrel's message of preparedness.
Exactly. We've got to be proactive, not just reactive, right? That means defensible spaces around homes, tougher building codes in fire-prone areas, and making sure people are educated about fire safety, like really educated.
That reminds me of that story in the book about the La Tuna fire in Los Angeles back in 2018. Biggest fire in the city's history, but it only destroyed a tiny percentage of homes.
That's such a good example of how preparation really, really works. People had created those defensible spaces around their properties, cleared the brush, created fuel breaks. It stopped the fire from spreading from the wildland to the homes.
So these defensible spaces, they act like a buffer zone, protecting structures from the heat and flames.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the risk where the wildland meets the urban area, that wildland-urban interface. And it's not just individual homeowners, it's about the whole community working together to make the landscape more fire-resistant.
Are there, communities that are doing this really well, the whole fire adaptation thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. One that comes to mind is Listos, California. It's a statewide program focused on preparing communities, building resilience. They do a ton of work, educating people about fire safety, creating support networks, empowering people to take action.
So it's like they're hitting it from all angles, not just putting out the fires, but preparing for them, reducing the risk, and then helping people recover afterwards.
Exactly. And it's not just physical preparation either, right?
Yeah.
It's the social and emotional stuff too. Helping people deal with the trauma, making sure they get the support they need to recover in the long term. That's huge.
We've talked a lot about, human actions, good and bad, and how they've affected these wildfires. But there's another big piece to this puzzle, right? Climate change. It's driving the frequency and intensity of these fires, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. Climate change is a massive factor. We've got rising temperatures, more droughts, and that creates the perfect conditions for wildfires to start and spread quickly. It's like literally we're adding fuel to the fire.
And it's this vicious cycle. More wildfires release more CO2, which warms the planet even more, which leads to even more fires.
A textbook feedback loop, and it's playing out everywhere. Amazon rainforest, the Arctic tundra, you name it.
Remember those Australian bushfires a couple of years ago? Those were so big they were creating their own weather patterns, those pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
Oh yeah, those were incredible examples of what we call fire-induced weather. Those fires burned like 65,000 square miles, releasing all that carbon, creating these massive thunderclouds. I mean, a fire that creates its own weather system, that's intense.
I read about a fire tornado, too. Hard to even wrap your head around that. And it's not just those immediate emissions that are scary, it's the long-term stuff. Those fires, they can change the ecosystem so much that it can't absorb carbon as well anymore.
That's a valid point. Mega fires can really mess with the carbon cycle. That intense heat damages the soil, and then plants can't regrow as easily, so they can't absorb as much CO2. And sometimes those fires release carbon that's been stored in the soil for hundreds of years. It's like a double whammy for climate change.
So we've got all these things going on: fire suppression, human activities, climate change. It seems like it's only going to get worse, more fires, more intense. Are we headed towards a world of just constant megafires?
It's a serious situation, no doubt. We need to act fast, address climate change globally, and completely rethink how we approach fire. We can't keep doing the same old things. We need new solutions.
So where do we go from here? What can we do? What are the concrete steps to build this more fire-resilient future?
It's a big challenge, right? We need a multi-pronged approach. Number one, we've got to slash those greenhouse gas emissions big time. That means switching to renewables, getting off fossil fuels, and making sustainable choices in every part of our lives.
It's about those big system-wide changes: our energy, transportation, how much we consume.
Exactly. We've got to break that feedback loop. where fires are making the problem worse. But tackling climate change isn't enough on its own. We have to change how we manage our forests and wildlands too.
So getting rid of that suppress every fire mindset. Embrace the fact that fire has a role in these ecosystems.
You got it. We need to shift from fighting fire to, living with fire. That means prescribed burns, working with indigenous communities to learn from their practices, and figuring out how to restore the natural fire regimes to make landscapes more resilient.
Recognizing that fire is part of the system and that trying to eliminate it can backfire, literally.
Right. And it's not just the land. We need to adapt our communities too. Update those building codes, make structures more fire resistant, smart zoning, limiting development in high risk areas, and community preparedness programs, educating people about fire safety.
It sounds like a huge cultural shift, but it's also like an opportunity, a chance to be more sustainable and resilient.
Absolutely. It's time to move beyond that fear and embrace a more nuanced understanding of fire. We've spent centuries trying to control it, but we can't completely tame it.
It's about coexisting with fire, respecting its power, and figuring out how to use it to our advantage. It's fascinating, but it also raises some big questions like, can we really change our relationship with fire in time to avoid the worst climate change? Could fire actually be part of the solution? I'm really curious to dig into those ideas.
Those are excellent questions, really important ones. I think it's time to look at some potential solutions and see how fire, which we often think of as the enemy in climate change, could actually help us create a more sustainable future. Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Fire, this major source of CO2, could actually help us fight climate change.
It does seem kind of backwards.
Think of it like this. Fire has always been a natural part of a lot of ecosystems, right? Helps maintain balance, allows for new growth.
Yeah.
But when we suppress all fire, well, we mess with those natural cycles.
Right.
So we get this buildup of fuel, and that leads to those massive, intense fires that release a ton of carbon dioxide.
So we're just delaying the inevitable and making it worse.
Exactly. But if we change how we manage fire, we can actually lower the risk of those huge fires, like using prescribed burns and taking a page from indigenous communities who've been doing controlled burns forever.
Makes sense. Healthier ecosystems, less fuel buildup.
Right. And remember the carbon cycle?
Yeah, plants absorb CO2, then release it when they burn.
Well, get this. New research is showing that charcoal from fires, especially those low-intensity ones, can lock carbon away in the soil for a long, long time.
So it's not going back up into the air, it's staying in the ground.
Exactly. It's called biochar. And scientists are looking at it as a way to capture carbon, store it away. Early research, but promising stuff.
Wow, so fire could do two things. Prevent those big carbon-releasing fires and help trap carbon in the soil.
Yep. We need to change how we see fire. Realize that it can be a good thing when we use it right.
Okay, so as we wrap up this wildfire deep dive, what are the big takeaways you want our listener to remember?
I think the main thing is fire is complicated. It's not just good or bad, destructive or helpful. It all depends on the situation, how we manage it, how we choose to live with this powerful force.
It's been an incredible journey, this whole world of wildfire. We've gone from the science to culture to climate change. We've seen tragic wildfires and hopeful solutions, and even the possibility of fire being a positive force. The big question for me is, can we change our relationship with fire in time to make a difference? Can we make a better future?
The million-dollar question, right? I do believe we can. With more awareness, education, and if we're willing to change our behaviors, we can create a more fire-resilient future. It's going to take all of us, but I'm optimistic.
It's a challenge for sure, but we got to try. And with that thought, we'll leave our listener to ponder that very question. Remember, fire is powerful, but we have the power to choose how we interact with it and shape its role in our world.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.